Let's listen to Gene Munster talk about this in a little more detail.
Gene, I do have a question about this EU fine. I understand it's $2 billion as of now, but that there's a high likelihood that Apple will appeal. Let's say worst case scenario, it doesn't work. They have to pay the $2 billion fine. Was it worth it? I mean, Apple has a pretty big cash pile. Was it worth it for the business perhaps it did get, even if it believes that it got it fair and square, for the revenue that it has acquired in the EU?
So the $2 billion, I agree. I think it's probably going to be more like $1 billion after everything is said and done. It'll take a year. It's 3% of their cash at the $2 billion level. I think the bigger question for me is what impact is these type of fines going to have on Apple's App Store revenue globally? And on their last earnings call, they talked about that the App Store in Europe was 7% of total App Store revenue. So that basically equates to 0.5% of Apple's overall revenue. So they knew that this was coming, these changes were coming, that this fine potentially was coming, and they wanted to get in front of investors and remind them how small of a piece that this is. But it does not change the bigger question, is that there will be changes coming to Apple's App Store across the board. And this is probably 40% of Apple's earnings come from services more broadly. And so I think when I think about that dynamic, they'll eventually pay the fine. And what really sticks out, and I've been closely watching what's happened in Canada, the U.S., South Korea, Japan, the EU in terms of all these changes. Apple is really smart in terms of how they navigate this. They will go and make changes to accommodate the courts, but then they find ways to essentially charge the developers anyway. And I suspect that that will frustrate and infuriate some developers, but at the end of the day, they're building huge businesses off of Apple's backbone. And I think despite their frustrations, they will continue to pay, and Apple will actually maintain better economics for their App Store over the next 5 years than I think what investors are expecting.
And look, I've talked about this App Store stuff multiple times on the channel, so you guys probably know how I feel about it. I think this is a ridiculous decision. And all of my EU viewers out there, I love you guys. You guys are amazing. But this EU decision is on par with the last EU decision that I didn't love, which was GDPR, which was that awesome regulation that's made most websites just completely unusable to me. I'm just saying. So is this ruling going to have a lasting impact on Apple and their business? Now, maybe there's going to be other rulings because of this one, but again, in the grand scheme of things, I think this is relatively small, and as long as Apple has the most attractive customer base that businesses want to reach, then they're going to be able to monetize the App Store one way or another. So it's not something that I'm too worried about. Okay, up next, the Apple car is dead, and that's probably okay.